to this, the first of our Rocket Learn webinars. As it is a webinar, you do have the ability to unmute yourself, but I would ask if you could stay muted throughout David's talk, and hopefully you'll have some time at the end for you to ask some questions when perhaps you would unmute yourself. It just saves the difficulty if somebody calls you on the telephone, or the Amazon person calls, or one of your younger children runs through, whatever it might be. That would be great if you could just keep yourself muted throughout the talk. Dave Winfield is manning the chat, so if you do have any particular questions as David Hawkins goes through his presentation, please enter them in the chat, and if you're having any difficulties as well, put that in the chat. Dave Winfield is monitoring the technology, and hopefully if there are any issues he'll be able to resolve those for you. We do want to make a pretty prompt start, because I know many of the students and those of you that are teachers or have been in Zoom meetings all day are pretty zoomed out, so we don't want to go on beyond the hour. So it's my great pleasure to introduce you to David Hawkins. I think it's fair to say that David is one of the world's top independent international college counsellors. And I think I'm right in saying that he's one of the 19 people in the world who have the gold standard of international affiliation with the Council of International Schools. So we're very fortunate to have a real expert talking to us tonight. He's a graduate of Oxford University himself, and I first came across David when I was at King Edward School in Bath, and David was teaching, I think, history, at Taunton School. And he then was what I would call a pioneer in the approach to international university application and admissions. And over the period of time, as I followed his career and taken his advice and watched many and listened to many of his webinars, I found him both an enlightening and engaging and enthralling speaker about this very wide and varied topic. So I have no hesitation in recommending you to David Hawkins. And David, it's a real pleasure to welcome you, and we look forward to your presentation. I'm going to switch my video off now to hopefully keep the thing stable, and enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I think after that I owe you a couple of pub lunches, not just one. That's a very kind introduction. If everyone just doesn't mind bearing with me whilst I do a little bit of sorting out the text, I'm just going to spotlight my video so you can see me and then share the screen. So Phil and Dave, can one of you just let me know if that's coming through okay?
Yes, that's coming through, David. That's perfect.
Yeah, it's fine.
Thank you, guys. Okay, so I'm going to run through a presentation, sort of trying to give some general kind of key themes about international universities. Doing the rest of the world in, well, 40 minutes and then time for questions is not easy, so I'll apologise in advance for two things. Number one, I won't be delving into absolute detail about every minute topic, but I will give some key trends and themes and point you in direction of where you can get some more resources later on. And the second thing I will apologise for is that this might feel like you're standing in front of a fire hose with just information coming, particularly if you are completely new to the concept of international universities. But I do want to kind of give you some starting points of where to think. And as a good teacher or former teacher, I'll start to kind of give you the learning objectives. The two things that are really important that you understand is applying to international universities, it means you are going to have to do a lot more work than applying to UCAS, and you're going to have to start much earlier applying to UCAS. If you keep those two things in mind, work harder and start earlier, you're at least going to be making sure you're going about this in the right way. As Phil has given my little potted CV, I started off teaching, fell into doing international university advising, both schools in the UK and abroad, and then came back to the UK a few years ago and set up to work alongside schools around the British Isles, but working for families to provide a sort of top-up service, supporting families with international university applications. And we now at the University Guys are a small team of people embedded within the UK sector, all with private school background, supporting students to hopefully make successful applications, and probably more important than that, reduce the stress they feel when maybe they have to deal with something that's a little bit new. My background is in schools, and so I think it's important to have qualifications and accreditations here. So as well as the CIS that you've heard of there, you'll see some bits of paper hanging behind me. So I maintain some accreditations in the US to keep me up to date with things, and also importantly, it means that people can complain if we do something wrong. My contact details are there. Please do follow us on the social media. We try and push out all sorts of useful information, and nothing is behind a paywall or anything. It's all there. Our students this year are doing quite well, so we're quite happy to report back from some of the early students. We helped international students apply to the UK as well, so we were celebrating Cambridge a couple of days ago. But even a competitive process, some of our students have gained offers to some world-class universities, which I imagine is why you're tuning to today. And so it's lovely to celebrate those successes. But I particularly like sharing this quote. This is a student we worked with last year, an international student who come to the UK for school. And I love the fact he said we helped him demystify the process. And I love that word. It wasn't one I was using before, but demystify. And there's so many myths about applying to international universities, things that kind of filter through a broadsheet newspaper or people pick up on social media or on message boards. And I love this idea of sort of focusing on what matters. I will say we didn't get him in, he got himself in. We just helped him understand what he needed to do to get himself in. And a lovely boy he was too. Okay, so big picture then before I delve into some key themes. And this is again something I really would like you to keep in mind as we think about international universities. University happens differently in different parts of the world. The university experience is one that is very conditioned by our cultural background. What we think of when we think of that word university is going to be coloured by the experience that we've had, our friends, our family, and what we've seen in media, films, TV, newspapers, etc. And there is another word which means different things in different parts of the world, and I've had it there for you long enough, so hopefully you have imagined in your head the game of football. So talking to you guys here in the UK, Phil and I were talking before we started about his beloved Newcastle, we're probably thinking about a sport that looks something like this. Notice I haven't picked an English team there. We're thinking that football is a game with a round ball and we're trying to kick the ball into the net and you know, all the things that come with that. But if I was talking to an audience in the US and said that same word to describe football, they would be thinking of something completely different. And my slightly tortured analogy here is to try and get the point that we need to think about university in other countries in the same way as there are different types of football. So we have Australian rules football, we have Gaelic football, and so on and so forth. That is the same for university. Now, you wouldn't turn up to play Australian rules or Gaelic football or American football without learning the game, without understanding the terminology, the strategy, without having the right protection. But in all honesty, a lot of students apply from the UK to international universities thinking it's our game. It's our rules. It works by our cultural context, the preconditions, the assumptions, everything about it is like it is here. And then they end up getting completely confused about other systems. And they're not potentially making bad choices, missing out on things. And then, you know, we get emails all the time from people saying, I don't understand. Why won't they do this? And well, because that's only the way it works here. And so if you're hung with this idea of football v football v football, same word for different things, then when we think about university in the USA, university in Canada, university in Europe, that will hopefully make you realize, okay, I need to go back to basics here. I've got to relearn a new system, not just think it's like picking up the UK university, stick it in maybe a different culture, different climate, or maybe with different food. So just as there are many different ideas of what football is, there are many different ideas of what university can be. And increasing numbers of students from UK schools are doing it. It's really, really hard to get solid data on this because obviously each country that is receiving students keeps their data, but they do it on country of passport, not necessarily country of where they were educated. The only real solid data we have is the Independent Schools Council, which in their 2019 survey showed that 5% of all Independent School Council leavers went to a non-UK university. Now, that's a greater proportion than went to study medicine. It's a greater proportion than went to Oxbridge. So it's a pretty serious number of students who are going on to do this. And they're going for all sorts of different reasons. But one of the big things I think is starting out, and perhaps why you are all here tonight, is there's just something in their heads, that dream of what that international university experience might be like. And for a lot of people, it's something like this. You'll recognize this is downtown Manhattan, New York City. And if you look just over to the side of the screen here, you'll see a little purple flag flying. That purple flag is the purple flag of New York University, the famous NYU. Two sides of this square in downtown Manhattan and a few other blocks behind it are NYU. This is their campus. You know, it is the most urban university experience you could possibly think of. So this attraction, this pull to a world megacity like New York, Boston, or Los Angeles really is a big draw. So that is enticing a lot of people are wanting to do that. It could, however, be something completely different. This is IE University, the building you'll see here down towards the left with the cars parked in front of it. This is the Segovia campus in Spain of IE. They also have a second campus, a much bigger campus in Madrid. Indeed, they're about to open their brand new campus, which is the 5th skyscraper in the center of Madrid. Yes, the university is building a skyscraper. But IE is an international English language university in Spain. And so there are an awful lot of students who might be attracted to studying in a completely different culture, completely different language area, but taught through the medium of English. And actually, if you look at the statistics from that Independent Schools Council survey, IE is as popular a destination as NYU is. Really interesting there. And the third one that's very popular, in fact, increasingly popular now after Brexit and indeed the rise of a certain TV programme recently, is Trinity College in Dublin. You look at this and think, that, gosh, that looks like a recognisably British university. Well, until just over 100 years ago, it was a British university, and then for all sorts of very sensible reasons, Ireland decided they'd had enough of the UK and decided to go their own way. And they have a university sector there where if you go to Trinity Dublin, you go to University College Cork and places like that, it feels like going to a St Andrews or a Lampeter or an Aberystwyth or something. You know, it's a recognisable experience. And so there are so many different options that are attracting people to international universities, all for different reasons and different things that go with the next steps for that international application. And so to give a little bit more detail on this, I want to talk through 4 themes, 4 reasons why university overseas, university beyond the UK is different. And I'll talk through each of these in turn. The first, the way in which students choose which universities to apply to works differently. The second being that you don't actually have to decide what you want to study at university before you apply. Now that's almost like a mind-blowing emoji reaction for a lot of British people. Hang on, don't you go to university to study something? Well, not in every country, actually, as I'll explain. The third one is how we assess the quality of a university. What makes a university good works very differently. And then the fourth one is actually how you apply to university. Now, in all this, and so in my career, I've supported students now with applications to 27 different countries. Right now at the university, guys, our students are applying to 16 different countries. On that spectrum, UCAS is out on one limb as being actually quite an unusual way of doing university. Unusual because of how streamlined it is, unusual because of how centralized it is, and unusual because of how grades-based actually it is. So as we go into this process, I'll ask you kind of Harry Potter style with the pensive, take that UK context out of your head and just park it for another 25 minutes or so, and let me hopefully explore some of these other options for you. So let's delve into these. So the first one, the way you choose a university. So you are sitting here thinking, right, I, my child, my students want to apply to an international university. Which ones? How do you go down that process? Well, let me show you the US just as a way of going a completely different idea. So we're used to in the UK concept of kind of using a couple of filters. What do you want to study? What grades are you predicted to achieve? And then within there, do I want a campus, a city, how far from home, those kind of things. But typically it's those first two. What do I want to study and what grades? You might want to study computer science at Imperial, but if you've got 3 Cs, that I'm afraid is not happening. So we have a way of doing it. Now, in the US, you don't apply to study a subject at university, and they don't have entry requirements. So how are American students choosing where to apply? Well, they're not picking where's good for a subject, they're picking the entire experience of being a student at university. The academics that a university offers, and I'll talk a bit more about that later, and the culture of that university. America is a big place. America, as we've all seen recently, is a complicated place. And their universities are reflective of that, of just the variety that we've got. There are actually over 4,000 degree granting institutions in the United States. I just picked 3 here to give you an example of just how different the experience can be from university to university and why that matters for students choosing where to apply. So you'll recognize the purple flags again. There is NYU. To keep the flag theme, I've got blue flags. This is UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles. And then in the middle there is Dartmouth College, one of the Ivy League in upstate New Hampshire. These are 3 world-class universities. I imagine you have all heard of them, which already means people think, well, these must be pretty good. You're going to need extraordinarily strong grades, both at GCSE and sixth form, to get into these universities. And yet, if you apply to all 3 of these, probably 2 of them would reject you because they're actually offering a different experience. I'll start with Dartmouth. It's in the small town of Hanover, New Hampshire. It's beautiful, there's not a lot else going on in Hanover other than Dartmouth. It's about 2.5-hour beautiful drive from Boston, another hour and a half, 2 hours to Burlington. It's not a big metropolis. And Dartmouth know this. It's woods and mountains, and it gets cold and it snows. You're going to see the same people day in and day out. So you have to be a good member of a community. Dartmouth go, okay, great. We understand people who come here have to be a good member of a community. How do we test that? Well, let's ask a friend to write a reference letter for them. Yeah, at Dartmouth, you are strongly recommended, which means in US speak, you should, to ask someone else in your year group at school to write a reference for you, as well as the 3 references your school will normally have to send. So if you don't have any friends, you're not going to fit in a Dartmouth. Obviously, that's a simplification, but the point is, they're looking for a particular kind of person, as well as someone who has the right grades. Now, in contrast, UCLA, they have over 100,000 applications every year. It's a massive public university. LA is a really complicated big city. LA County has a population of about 10 million people, bigger than the population of some states in the United States. So it's a really complicated bureaucracy. And their application system, because it's so big, forces you to be independent. There are actually nothing that your school does through an application to the University of California system. No references, nothing. The student has to do it all. You have to be independent in your application, because you're going to have to be independent to survive the UC system. Now, in NYU, it's kind of somewhere between the two. I've shown you how urban NYU is, but it is a campus-based university. It's a private university. They actually also had over 100,000 applications this year, that they were a little surprised by that. But the community you find in NYU doesn't necessarily have to be linked to the university, because you've obviously got the city around you. So NYU, they talk about being in and of the city. So if you are an archaeology major, an art history major, a fine art major, maybe your community is also going to be at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. If you're at the Stern School of Business, community is probably going to be on Wall Street, or maybe in some of the tech startups. If you're studying at Tisch in the School of Arts, it might be at the Lincoln Center for ballet and music and things. So again, they're looking for a different kind of people. Now, I've already spent longer talking about the culture of these 3 universities than you probably would ever spend talking about a UK university's culture and why that matters for students going there. And you go on and on and on with more and more universities, but hopefully to get the idea that when we're thinking about choosing an international university, we have to think about it in a different way on the terms it would be considered there. And so what are the other questions you might have to ask yourself? Well, one of the things that we do unusually in the UK is that we go away for university. We have a residential experience. These are some stats here from the Higher Education Policy Institute. About the most recent survey, just over 80% of UK students were living away from home when they went to university. Obviously not now, but in normal times. But you see here in Ireland and Australia and other parts of Europe, that's an unusual thing. Have you ever considered that actually, do I want to live somewhere else for university? Do I want to go to a university where most of the other people there are actually from the local area? Do I want to go to what's called a commuter university? Do I want to have to sort out my own accommodation as a first-year student? And again, different kind of questions we have to think about. Not every university in the world assumes that you will live at that university. And most public universities in continental Europe don't provide accommodation to their students at all, which very much changes the vibe and the culture of what it's like to be a student at that university. Another factor that we tend not to have to consider in the UK is, do I want to go to a university that teaches everything, or a university that specialises in a subject area? We do have some music schools, fine art schools. We've got a couple of new engineering places that have started up recently. But typically, most UK universities are teaching most things. If you go to the University of Lancaster, yes, they're doing engineering, they're doing drama, they're doing English literature, they're doing business. And so the sort of people you mix with are going to be from across a thing. And those of us who've been to the British university system can tell stories of meeting our friends who were studying different subjects. But around the world, we can find some very specialized universities, places like Caltech and California Institute of Technology, which brings in only 256 new undergraduate students a year. Postgraduate, huge. The joke at Caltech is being an undergraduate at Caltech is like being a wart on the side of a rhinoceros. You're physically there, but no one's actually noticing you. And that's going to change what it's like for the social life, because if you're playing on the soccer team, but most of the people there are in their 20s, their 30s, or the 40s, and you're 18, 19, well, that's going to change the connections you make. It's going to change maybe the quality of accommodation a university has to offer. And this applies equally to like economic schools like Bocconi in Milan, Algebra University College in Croatia, you can guess what they specialize in. All sorts of really niche providers around the world where they are doing something very, very focused, which may be only has a couple of hundred undergraduates but more postgraduates. Now that'd be exactly the perfect fit for somebody. It might be completely the wrong thing for somebody else. And again, we need to not assume that every university is exactly the same. So first point, how do you choose a university? You have to ask yourself questions you probably never even thought of asking. And in there is this second point, the mind-blowing emoji is just how different it can be, is what you will study could be very different going to a non-UK university. This is a question I used to like to give when we were able to give talks in person. Those were the days. What do you think you'll study if you go to MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which exists in popular culture as the most STEM of any STEM institution? And here I would be channeling Stephen Fry or Sandy Toksvig, waiting for the wrong answer of someone shouting engineering, maths, physics, because it actually misses the point of understanding how academics can work differently in other parts of the world. And again, I'll start with the US as just a good way of exploring this. So let me delve into the MIT curriculum. MIT offers one degree. It is a Bachelor of Science. That is the only degree they offer. Okay, cool. It's a Bachelor of Science degree. But in that Bachelor of Science degree, every student is taking a core requirement. That is a series of requirements to study certain things in order to qualify to get that degree. And that core is half science and maths and half humanities, arts and social sciences. Fair enough, science and maths, it's MIT, here's the sort of classes you can take, biology, physics, calculus, etc. But for the humanities, arts and social sciences requirement, you're going to have to take one course in each of the humanities and social sciences. So that could be Shakespeare, that could be French Revolution history, could be music appreciation. But that's quite odd to those of us in the UK. I'm going to study physics and I'm sitting here taking a class in Shakespeare. Well, yes, welcome to the liberal arts and sciences. The liberal arts and sciences is a philosophy of education going way back to the Roman times, where the US has built their educational system around a very different idea. Theirs is about academic breadth. In ours, in the UK system, we drop stuff. Drop stuff when you do your GCSEs, you drop more stuff when you go into the sixth form, and you drop more stuff when you go to university. We narrow our curriculum. In the US and in the liberal arts and sciences, which now appears in many other parts of the world, including indeed some UK universities, it's a very different system. So in that UK model, you'd also find in a lot of continental Europe and in some other parts of the world as well. You go to university to just study something. So I studied history at Oxford. Everything I got was history. All my classes, my lectures, my exams were about history. The analogy I would use is like it's going out for a meal and ordering a set menu. If I've gone to an Italian restaurant and ordered their set menu, I'm expecting to get Italian food. If I've gone to study history at Oxford, I've ordered history. They're going to give me history. I'd be very confused going out for Italian restaurant if suddenly a Korean dish arrived. But in the US, it's like going for a buffet. Here is everything the university offers. Here are all the classes. Pick and mix. Build your own degree. So in the US system, in the liberal arts and sciences system that many other countries have replicated, if I'd gone to major in history, first of all, I wouldn't have been admitted as a historian. I'd have been admitted to the university, not to Harvard to study history, just to Harvard. And if I then decided to pick a major in history over the course of the 4-year degree, about a third of my classes, the maximum probably about a third, could have been history classes. And in that other 2/3 comes the beauty, but sometimes also the challenge of the liberal arts and sciences. The middle third is going to be things like I've just shown you at MIT that the university insists that you take. So as a historian, I'd have been taking maths classes, I'd have been taking science classes, I'd have still had to do languages, literature, even at some places physical education. Columbia University, for example, forces students to pass a swimming test in order to be able to graduate. I'd have been taking all sorts of interesting stuff, and I'd have met the requirements that university says. Though these requirements differ wildly university to university, and so you've got to make sure you're applying for stuff you actually want to do. And in that final third, it's kind of free choice. I could just take a bunch of classes. If I wanted to take anthropology, if I want to pick up philosophy, I want to learn a new language, great. If I want to double major, fantastic. Worked with a student once whose plan was to double major in engineering and ballet. Can't find that on UCAS. That is a Google whack on UCAS. It does not exist. The US, perfectly possible. Engineering and ballet, double major. You can major and minor. You could just take a bunch of electives. And to be honest, if I got there, taken a bunch of history classes and decided, you know what, I hate it. But that anthropology, I love that. I've also got the flexibility to pick and choose what my major might be going forwards. So a completely different philosophy of actually what you study at university. And so around the world, we have on the one end that single or joint honours focus we see in UK, continental Europe, and a lot of places that are the former imperial countries in the British Empire. Liberal arts and sciences is very big in the US and other places replicating it. Now, that US choice also means that it's going to be different from university to university. So I've shown you MIT, here in contrast is Brown, a very different core curriculum because there actually isn't one. If you just want to study engineering, you're actually better off at Brown because you will just be able to do engineering as long as you prove you can write. You won't have to do that language and literature and stuff at like at MIT. Now, between those two poles, US kind of liberal arts and sciences on one end, single joint honours, British style on the other, we also have a kind of halfway house with a Canadian option. Places like Australia, New Zealand, South Africa are a little bit similar, where it's a little broader than the UK model, but not quite as broad as the US. And this is where you would apply to a general program of study rather than just apply to everything. So if I'd gone to, say, McGill or University of Toronto in Canada, I'd applied for Bachelor of Arts. I would have still had to take other classes within the arts or the humanities and social sciences. If I'd wanted to, I could have taken classes in the sciences and maths and things, but I wouldn't have to. And so we have kind of broad areas of study in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, similar as well. Science, fairly obvious. Commerce, all the business classes, engineering. There's also places that offer Bachelor of Fine Arts, Bachelor of Nursing, those kind of things. Now, we've got our heads around that. Okay, so it works differently. We study things differently. Then perhaps there are choices in parts of the world. Well, okay, I've decided the subject. Well, in what way do you want to be taught that subject? And this is very much a European phenomenon where we have the traditional kind of research university, the idea of you sit down, you have lectures, you do exams, you write something, all that kind of stuff. But we also have universities of applied sciences called slightly different things in other parts of the world. So Ireland, for example, calls them institutes of technology, where perhaps the same subject is going to be taught in a very different way, more of a problem-based way. So the University of Applied Sciences, and particularly in the content of Europe, this is professional higher education, training you for a competency, is going to be very much about learning a skill through a problem-based process. They typically have mandatory internships to why it's a 4-year degree rather than a 3-year degree. And I'll use the subject of business as a good way of explaining this difference. Someone studying business at a research university, taught in English in somewhere like the Netherlands or Belgium, it's going to be sit down, here's some books, we're going to teach you law, micro, macroeconomics, consumer psychology, a lot of marketing case studies. It's very academic. If you're studying business at the University of Applied Sciences, you might have a term where 3 people from local businesses come in and mentor you in small groups. They've got a problem in their business they want you to resolve. So you'll be learning all these things, but you'll be learning by doing. Now, interestingly, in most European countries, there's kind of parity of esteem between these in most cases. Both can lead on to master studies, and you'll notice actually there are some subjects that you can't do at both. If you want to be a nurse, you want to do something in the fine arts, it has to be the applied sciences sector. Typically speaking, research universities, why do things happen? Applied sciences is how do I make things happen? And so even there we see different choices. And just to kind of wrap this all up, when we start to bring in the Asian context, we have completely different models of how things, look at Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, great options taught in English. The liberal arts is being reinterpreted for the 21st century in all sorts of parts of the world. So international liberal studies at Waseda in Tokyo. India has just announced a massive reform to its education sector from huge amounts of English language universities built in the liberal arts. Universities in the US have done partnerships overseas. So we've got NYU Abu Dhabi, Yale National University of Singapore. So completely different ideas. In Australia and New Zealand, the academic calendar works based on their climate. Why do we have long summer holidays? Because we needed people to go and pick the crops. When is the summer in the Southern Hemisphere? What's in our winter? So that's when they have their summer holidays. So the academic year starts in February, run through to December. And then just to show how different what you study can be, are 2 options which I think are phenomenal and are having many more replicants coming through now. The World Bachelor in Business is a program joint between Bocconi in Milan, the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and the University of Southern California in LA. First year in Milan, second year in Hong Kong, third year in LA, fourth year, whichever one of those you want to go back to, studying business in completely different contexts all around the world. And Minerva, KGI, a California-based university, decided to go one step further. Every 6 months, the students move to a different part of the world as part of their studies. So what will you study? Well, depending on where you go, it can be completely different from anything else. Third point of the differences when we start on things is that good means different things in different country. How do we work out what's a good university? How can we work out whether this is a quality place? And again, in the UK, we're unusual in this. We have entry requirements. And that is the currency. That is how we look at whether this university is good. If this place is asking for 3 A's and this place is asking for 3 B's, 42, 38 in the IB, whatever it might be, we think the one with the higher requirements is better. I'll give you a little secret here. UK universities know this. They know if they put that course in at 3 B's, they won't get as many applicants if they put it in at 2 A's and a B. They'll take you at 3 B's. But go from there. UCAS are coming in the next month or two, actually releasing some data on this kind of stuff. So you'll actually be able to see, I think probably on the search.ucas.com, what grades actually did you need to get in compared to what they're asking for. But we don't have entry requirements in other parts of the world. Well, how do we assess the quality of the university? And this is where stuff can get completely lost in translation. I'll go back to football and football. We've got to learn new terminology. So I quite often get people saying, is the Ivy League, those are the good universities, aren't they? Ivy League, it's like the Russell Group. What's a red brick university in Canada? How are these good, nice civic universities? Well, Canada's basically a red brick country if you look at when it was founded. And so this idea of entry requirements is a really tricky one. And I use the term Ivy League to try and flash it, so you'll hear it in the media, put it everywhere. When we start working with a family and they want to go to the US and aim in these universities, one of the first things I'll ask them is, tell me which university is in the Ivy League. Very rarely does someone get it right. The Russell Group is an academic grouping. It is also quite a dangerous term, but at least there's some academic merit to it. It was named after the Russell Hotel, which no longer exists. They are a number of research-intensive UK universities with medical schools, which is why you'll find places like Loughborough and Bath, for example, on it, because they don't have medical schools. The Ivy League is a sports competition. It's 8 universities with similar ways in which they fund their sports programs, similar ages, and located relatively close to each other, who play sports against each other. They actually originally had 7 members. Rutgers turned them down because they have a state foundation. Colgate, too far away, turned them down. Brown, halfway between Yale and Harvard, said yes. And so that's how Brown became this world-class university. It was good before, but that's how it came into it. So the Ivy League are not the 8 best, the 8 oldest, and certainly not the 8 most selective US universities. So when people say, I want to go to the Ivy League, what I'm hearing is someone saying, I actually really don't know much about this. No one in America, unless they are in some very, very particular circumstances, applies to all 8 Ivies, because they know they're going to get denied because they're so different from each other, apart from the things that make their sports programs work differently. And so because of this idea, we need to understand, again, quality. Now, quality also has to come with scale. What is a good university? Well, it's a top university, okay? What's the top university? What makes a university top? Well, is it top 5, top 10, top 20, top 30? Well, in order to work out scale, we need to understand what is the size of the sector we're talking about. The US has 3.5 million students leaving high school each year, graduating high school. So in the lower 6 and the upper 6, and the equivalent in the US now, about 3.5 million students, 4,000 plus degree granting institutions, which makes the scale massive. And these stats here, I think, bear that out. The Ivy League, these 8 universities, each year reject 250 of many students. It's going to be much more than that this year because of how the situation has changed. That is more than the total number of British students who went to any British university. And so we have to get our head around a different sense of scale. And when we look at Canada, for example, 3 Canadian universities, McGill, U Toronto, and University of British Columbia, which are massive universities, educate as many students as the top 20 in the US. Because actually a lot of these top US universities are tiny. Whereas University of Toronto has 60,000 undergraduates, Harvard's got about 5,500 undergraduates. So we've got to grasp our head around scale. If you were looking at the top 10 universities in the UK, maybe we need to be looking at the top 100 in the US as being of equal quantity. Maybe we need to look at the top 20 in Canada. Psychologically, that's really hard. If your child would never look at the university ranked 80th in the UK, that's really hard to then be comfortable with a university ranked 80th in America. But that's really challenging when we start to think about then selectivity in different places. There are 57 US colleges in the last cycle that are more selective than Oxford or Cambridge. Now I can tell you that Pomona and Bowdoin and Colby and Clare McKenna and Swarthmore are awesome universities, but you may not have heard of those places. And so we've got to learn more to understand the quality of these universities. And we mentioned the tininess of some of these universities. Again, they're not making a huge amount of offers. Harvard only has 1,650 spaces a year. You see some of the other numbers here as well. Scale also works the other way. Yes, the US is a much bigger sector than the UK. Ireland, on the other hand, is a much smaller. These are the Irish universities. There's a new one just been emerging. But this is it. So we've gone from over 4,000 in the US to 9. in Ireland. About 57,000 students leaving high school in Ireland every single year. And so again, the scale has to work in the other way. In maybe that context, if you're applying to the 9th ranked university in Ireland, you've probably not done that well. But the 9th ranked in America is still probably going to say no to 95% of people who apply to it. It's that competitive. So we've got to again get our heads around the culture of a different university. It's not about entry requirements. It's about looking at selectivity and quality in the context of that country. Quite often I get people going on here, well, if my child wants to work, then I'll come back to the UK. No one will have ever heard of the university. They don't go to one of these places people have heard of. What's going to happen? They'll never get a job. And I'll say typically 3 things to that. The first one, this is the very honest thing, your kids might not come back. Typically people go to university and they meet people and they want to stay with those people, and people might be from other parts of the world. So point number 1. Second thing is, you might not have heard of them, but other universities have. And so a lot of people maybe will do an international experience for undergraduate and then come back to the UK for postgraduate. So you might not know Swarthmore's amazing, but the University of Oxford, University of Cambridge, King's College London recruitment departments do. So undergraduate in the US, postgraduate here. And the third thing, the bigger picture I would say is, if your child is wanting to go, if you're coming here tonight because you've got that spark in the child who wants to go outside the UK for university, if a company says, we don't care, we wish you'd gone to the UK, it's probably not a company that student would be actually very happy working for in the future anyway. When we're talking about entry requirements, a few other points I want to make as well when we're considering choosing the quality of a university. Across Europe and all the public universities, we actually have a very minimal entry requirements. We don't have selection at the gate from high school into university. We typically have selection after the gate, from year 1 into year 2. This is KU Leuven here in Flanders, the Dutch bit of Belgium. Beautiful university, top 50 in the world on one ranking, top 100 in the world on another ranking. They'll take you with 3 Cs into that university for one of their 4 degrees taught in English. Okay, that's boggling. How can it be that highly ranked with 3 Cs? Well, minimal requirements to get in, 85% to stay in first year to year 2. And you'll find there's a lot of Dutch universities, French universities, German universities, and so on. We look at it and the entry requirements seem low. That's because they're comparing our exams, A-levels, IB, pre-U, etc., to their academic high school. And a lot of those countries, students were kind of chosen for the most academic pathways age 13, 14, 15. So if you know Germany, you've gone to a gymnasium, you're then doing an Abitur, there's actually not many kids already on that pathway to university. And so they look at our qualifications and think, well, that's the equivalent that way as well. And even we have world-class universities, actually grades are not the be-all and end-all. A really wonderful career that a lot of people aspire to is the world of global hospitality. I don't mean washing tables and cleaning up after people have eaten. I mean like running 5-star luxury hotels or super yachts or doing private banking, anything that's about creating experience. And these world-class universities, for example, this one, École Hôtelière de Lausanne in Switzerland, teaching in English, don't care about book smarts. Yes, okay, you've got to have a decent level of academics, but it's about emotional intelligence. It's about being able to respond to people's needs. And they're selecting for aptitude, the same way as world-class art schools will do, world-class drama schools, these kind of places. So yes, you need the grades, but have you got that aptitude the university is selecting for as well? And again, once we start to get into world-class universities all over the globe, that aptitude is going to be a much more important thing than maybe how strong are your A-levels. And that's why it's sometimes hard to work out what the entry requirements might be. Okay, the last bit, and I kind of prejudged this earlier by saying about the amount of work, applications don't work like UCAS. And this is where UCAS really is phenomenal. I've just completed filling in the consultation the Department of Education put out about basically let's ruin UCAS by making it a post-qualifications application system. And people like me who deal with the systems and saying, why would we make our system harder? UCAS is the world's most streamlined and straightforward process. The rest of the world is more complicated. We don't have a common system. We don't have an easy place we can go to. We don't tend to have government bodies doing it. There are a few other countries who have similar systems. The Netherlands has a thing called StudyLink, which as a registration platform is okay, though applications can happen differently. Ireland for EU and UK citizens has the CAO. If you're not in those, you have to apply directly. Sweden has a system as well. Other parts of the world have competing systems. So in the US, depending on which university you're applying to, you might have to use a different system. If you're applying to UCLA, NYU, Georgia Tech, and MIT, 4 different application systems. Some countries where the education system is federal, different systems in different parts of the country. It would be like if Scotland had one system, Wales had one, and England had another. Most parts of the world, though, the expectation is you apply directly to that university. So forget what you're actually going to have to do for the application, just managing dates and deadlines and paper requirements and that bane of parents of teenagers, getting the kids to check their emails and make sure they remember their login details. That's already much more complicated than UCAS. Now, the biggest difference between these and UCAS as well is that in UCAS, schools run UCAS. International applications, the schools don't. So sometimes the first time a school might be able to do anything for a student's US application is when the student inputs the email address of the relevant person at the school. Completely different around to how UCAS works with things like buzzwords connecting students and schools. Now, once you are into those systems, there are some parts of the world where actually you're not going to have to provide much. So somewhere like Canada, really simple. Who are you? What have you been studying? And what would you like to study with us? It's like UCAS without the statement of reference. Now, you might find yourself doing this 5 or 6 times, and then after you've applied, having to log in and do more things on each portal afterwards. But actually, the amount of work is not crazy. I'm afraid, though, we're back to our old friend, the United States, the world's most complicated application system, where actually the amount of work is intense. It's like an AS level, like half an A level's amount of work. Because you're not applying for something, the universities can't select you and how good are you at business or physics or engineering. They have to select you as a member of that community. So they want to know who you are. Yes, 17, 18-year-old, write 650 words on the meaning of your life to date. These are 3 of the 7 common app prompts. The coalition ones are broadly similar. These are not things you're going to knock off in 2 drafts the night before. This is something genuinely, we will get to 16, 17 drafts with some students working on. We'll spend 2 hours in a session with a student brainstorming ideas for some of these questions. People writing about their love of peanut butter, of learning to unicycle, of tragic events in their life, of really difficult things they've had to deal with as part of their application essay. It takes more time. And then because it's about individual universities, unlike in UCAS, US universities will also, in most cases, want students to write essays just for that university. And again, if we're applying to universities which expect a direct application in Europe and Japan and other parts of the world, they're going to want essays just for them. So you can't just write about my love of business. You can't stick that Nelson Mandela quote at the start of your personal statement. You're going to actually have to know much more about the university you're applying to. It's not, why do I like business? Why do I like business in the particular way this university teaches? And which one of their professors do I admire? Which one of their professors' books have I read? And which club at your university would I like to go to? Some of these questions, these are some US university ones, are quite complicated. What does it mean to be educated? Talk about a situation demanding critical thinking. And the University of Chicago, really, really interesting university. The hook there is it's where fun comes to die. Very quirky academic community. And you see this quirky academic question. Cats have 9 lives, Pac-Man has 3 lives, and radioactive isotopes have half-lives. How many lives does something else, conceptual or actual, have, and why? Good luck with that, 17, 18-year-old applicant, when you've only realized the night before that that's due. This is something that takes deep thinking. And famously, the University of Chicago, about 6 years ago, one of their questions was, where's Wally? That's a really interesting university if that's the sort of question they're asking their applicants to go. Now, it also has complexities when we start to think about equivalency in terms of the application procedures as well. And this where, for some of you, the choices you might be making of what you would study in the 6th one could be all important. Because as I mentioned when I was talking about the choosing where it's good, a lot of European universities have minimal requirements, but you do need to be studying the right thing. You need to present with the right credential. And so there's a difference in a lot of European countries between actually having a strong application and being an eligible application. KU Leuven, it doesn't matter whether you've got 3 A stars or 3 Cs. The eligibility is 3 Cs, it's fine. In other countries, actually, though, they do have very specific requirements. So, for example, you want to study in Germany, you must have taken the same subjects as a German student would have taken in their school system, in the Abitur, which means you need to have A levels that include a first language, so typically that'd be English, a second language, okay, English and a language, that's not an unusual combination, maths and one of the traditional sciences, okay, well, English and a language and maths. Okay, there's not many students who do that. Oh, and the 4th one's got to be one of the traditional humanities as well. Now, that's an odd combination, but you have to have those to be eligible for direct entry to public universities in Germany, and actually it's pretty similar in Switzerland. Now, if you've just taken them, got E's in them, you're eligible. You could have had maths, further maths, chemistry at A star. You could have a place in Oxford, but I'm afraid, sorry, you're not eligible for direct entry to university. So a different kind of way of doing it. Some of these credential-based systems also include something called numerus fixus or numerus clausus, where it's actually not just open access, because some things like medicine, for example, psychology, physiotherapy, they need also to see you have particular competencies. They might have extra selection procedures, interviews, essays, and those kind of things. In Ireland, we have a really fascinating system. They don't really have an admission system. They have a matching procedure. You're applying to perhaps 20 different courses in Ireland. No statement if you're what's called a CAO applicant, an EU or UK student, in order of preference. And your A-levels, IB, what have you, are converted to CAO points. If there are 100 spots for history at Trinity College Dublin, the people who get the 100th highest points get that spot. If you're 101st, sorry, you didn't get in. And then on to your second and third choice. Again, a completely different philosophy. So the way students are selecting university and all sorts of credential-based systems have to work very differently. Because if you're into basically everywhere, then the location, the size, the program can work completely differently in this idea of how we're choosing, and the workload can also work differently as well. Okay, I said at the start that I was going to be fire hosing and I was going to have to be general. If there is anything I haven't covered or I've skipped over some of this, our website, you can see here, theuniversityguys.com. This is our knowledge section. If you click on the knowledge section, you'll see this page. And in here, we've got a podcast, we've got recorded webinars, and the guides has a link to all our blogs, Facebook videos and stuff, covering a lot of this stuff in much more detail. I say it's not paywalled. There's a newsletter you can choose to sign up to, but if you don't want to, just click off that. Huge amount of resources for you there as well. If you do want to follow up with some information about our services, theuniversityguys.com/initial meeting takes you to a calendar. You can book an appointment with me. As you might imagine, I get booked up quite quickly, but that's just a free, no obligation consultation. If you are into podcasts, we run a podcast in all podcasty places, Apple and Spotify and stuff, talking about these kind of things with experts from all over the world. And if you would like to get in touch with me, my details are there, david@theuniversityguys.com, and all the various social things there as well. Okay, I'm almost bang on time, Phil. That's not too bad. I'm going to stop the share and stop the pinpoint, and you can fire some questions at me.
That's absolutely brilliant, David. Thank you. We've had a couple of questions in the chat, which I'll just put. One is easily answered. A couple of people have asked if this video recording will be available, and Dave Winfield has reassured them that it will. And the second question, which I'll just give you time to ponder while I just say a couple of words, is there a kind of step-by-step guide to put all this, to narrow down all these options choices? And I did respond in the chat. I said I'll put that to David, and I agree it's a challenge, and that's where counsellors like David Hawkins and I hopefully come to your rescue. So I'll just give you a moment to think about your response to that, David, while I just say thank you very much. As always, I've learned much. I thought I knew quite a bit, but I've learned more today again. And I know one or two of the students that I work with are attending this webinar today, and they will echo the fact that some of the things that I've said you've reinforced, and you've kind of added to their knowledge, which is fantastic. But for those of you that are new to this, I'm sure it is overwhelming, but I think David has done, as always, a very succinct and very, very focused job, and much appreciated, David. So on behalf of all the 31 people attending tonight here, or with other youngsters as well, I'm sure we're on more than one person on each video machine, or each computer rather. So you've spread the message far and wide. So I don't know if anybody else has a question to ask David before, but you can either put it in the chat and I'll pass it on, or if you'd like to unmute yourself and speak. Obviously, if all 30 of us speak at the same time, it's going to be a bit complex.
I'll say two things on, you asked me that,
yeah, good.
But I'll also say, you do an awesome job yourself, and I'm a big fan of yours, and the work that you do is really inspirational. And for those who don't know your story about how you got yourself trained and went off to America and all this kind of stuff, you really are a great resource to people in your part of the world, and I'm grateful to know you and to admire your work. In terms of the question about, are there guides and step-to-step stuff and all these kind of things, that I'll say no, and I wish I didn't have to. I wish I didn't say that there are people like us that exist, and we have to provide a living, and so we charge. UCAS makes us think it should be like that, because we are used to having the world's best system, which is why, as you might gather, I'm so frustrated with the government policy that PQA is going to make things easier, post-qualification applications, because it will not. It will just provide a whole demand for an industry in the UK of people doing like this, which there shouldn't be. The problem is that the rest of the world works differently, and the families there grow up knowing it's not going to be something that you can just rely on someone else to do. You are going to have to put more time and support into it. I find it staggering. You'll see behind me, I have shelves, including a huge amount of books, and Phil, I'm sure you've got the same, of just mass market books on choosing colleges in the United States. And yet that market doesn't exist in the UK. And it exists in Canada and exists in other parts of the world. And it's because we're so lucky with our system. So how you filter it through, it just comes down to those two things I said earlier. Start early and work hard. You definitely do not need to pay money for this. Definitely do not need to pay money for help. I don't have magic special knowledge that I've been to some special camp and learned this. I've just done it for a long time, and I'm lucky enough to specialize in it. But everything I've learned, anyone else can learn, as long as you know it's going to be new. We're going to have to put the work in to pick this all up. Buy some good books, go from there, and you will at least be giving yourself a pretty good start on where to go.
Yeah, thank you. I would echo that as well. I often say to students, this is something you can do yourself, but you're just going to have to put the hard yard in, and it is a hard yard as well. A question from Gabby. This is another all-encompassing question. How would you get a scholarship to a US university, David? I'll pass that one over to you. That's
Okay, so with all this kind of stuff, I'll give you the short answer, but say there is a much longer answer, which I don't have time for. But there is... University advising is one of these things where complexity matters. It's why I'm the person who gets fed up with the broadsheet newspapers, because they boil down extraordinarily complex things to what they have to do, short things. But the complexity actually matters here, and US funding is a big one. There are typically three ways to fund your study at university in the United States, and actually in other parts of the world as well. The first one, and to us the most popular one for students in the UK, is a sports scholarship, where you are recruited by the university to play sports for that university. That's because the US doesn't have like feeder leagues. It doesn't have semi-pro teams. The universities are where you go to before you get in. And that's a process where a coach needs to think you're good. So you're going on the sports scholarship route, you need a coach to want you. It's not about admissions. It's about, if you're a soccer player, does the coach of that soccer team want you? That is by far how most students from the UK are getting money to go to university in the US, and it can be extraordinarily remunerative. If you're not like that and you're going direct admission, then you've got two other options. You've got scholarship in terms of merit, like being good for something, and then you've got need-based, i.e. your family don't have the money to pay for everything, so the university is going to fund it. Both of those are in most cases going to impact your strength of your application, apart from in a very few cases. On the need-based, most universities are going to be looking at how much money they would have to give you for you to go, as part of the factor of deciding where you'll get in or not. Now, bear in mind, everyone in the world wants to go to university in America, including some people from extraordinarily underprivileged backgrounds. And so you've got to look good against everybody else who's competing for money. So if you're going to a university that offers a need-based aid package, someone like, for example, New York University does offer need-based aid to international students, you've got to be one of the best people of everybody else applying for aid. There are a few universities that are need blind. That means they will not look at how much need you have and decide to admit you or not. Now you've got to think about that. If you're need blind, it means you could suddenly find out that you've just admitted everybody to your university and you have to provide them with 100% of the fees at $75,000 a year potentially. That's 7 universities in America, and the names like Harvard and Yale and places trip off the tongue. That's also challenging because these places are hyper competitive. Actually, where most students are getting money is merit based. That is where you are just good for that university. It would be like saying I'm good enough to go to Oxford, but I'm going to Oxford Brookes. Not demeaning Oxford Brookes, but it's a less selective University of Oxford. And if you are getting the grades for Oxford, you probably look very strong for Oxford Brookes. And in the US context, that might be a place that offers you an 80, 90, 100% scholarship. And this is the decision that US students are making all the time. I got into Harvard, but it's $75,000 a year. But Boston University offered me the presidential scholarship, so I'll go there. Now that has an interesting cultural thing because it impacts, the hierarchy in the US. The US, going to an Ivy League does not actually guarantee you successful life. Harvard leads in one metric in career outcomes: the number of graduates in prison. The number one provider of CEOs on the Forbes 500 list is Texas A&M University. The number one providers of doctoral candidates are all the big state universities. We've got president now who went to the University of Delaware, vice president who went to Howard University. We don't have that fixation in the US of the branding here. So long-ish answer, but definitely could have been longer, Gabby. How do you get a scholarship to US University? Start early, put in the work, and I'll add, be humble. Be humble, because you're probably going to end up going somewhere where you will be the best or one of the 10 best students at that university, because that's why they've given you the money.
And a supplementary question to the same question as Gabby asked is from Sarah, asking, how do you stand out to a coach? What steps do you take to stand out to a coach? I mean, I know things like, well, I'll let you answer, David, obviously.
Well, I mean, there's kind of two halves to that. I mean, if you do a sport that's data centric, like you throw the javelin this far or you run the 100 meters this fast, then that's really easy because you're probably competing at a level where you've got official stats, and you send that to the coach and say, I threw the javelin 85 meters. The coach is going to be pretty impressed. For something like, you know, hockey or our football and that kind of stuff, it's obviously much more subjective, and to us, that's where people potentially would be well advised to work with a specialist in sports stuff. I don't do it, and I feel you've got some track record in that kind of stuff. Work with someone good, work with someone ethical. Don't work with someone you just found on Facebook, and certainly don't work with a company who had a big BBC expose about them. You can Google that and find out who they are. But you're going to have to start early there. You're going to have to get track record. You're going to have to get video. You're going to have to fish really widely in that kind of stuff. You know, you as the students are like bait. Make your bait look really attractive, really nice highlights video, this kind of stuff, and then chuck it out there to as many people as you possibly can, and then follow the bites. Now, you might want to go to Stanford, but the coach at Stanford doesn't like you, but the coach from Liberty University does. Guess where you might be going? Do you want to add anything on that, Phil? Because I know this is something you do a lot of.
No, I would agree with that, and I know Sarah's asked that question, and she and I are having a conversation tomorrow, and we'll kind of expand on that a little bit. So yes, I agree with you. You've got to be. And you do have to make choices. I think in all these, with certainly my experience with American universities, it's often a funding choice, a location choice, a course choice, a best fit choice. There are choices to be made, which are certainly more reduced in the United Kingdom. The last question was really, is it possible to have some sort of decision tree to narrow down? This is from Lucy about the options. Is that something you've been, your magnum opus that you've been working on?
Every time people say to me I should write a book, and I just can't. I don't have the time. I have 3 small children and a business to run, but possibly, broadly speaking, I think what I would say is, what is the conversation you should be having at home? You know, what is that family meeting, neutral space, you know, pizza night, however you call it? What is that family discussion that you're all having? I think it needs to factor on 3 things. First one, and it's hard to have this sometimes with teenagers or teenagers with parents. The first one has to be money. What is the pot of money? And if the pot of money is not going to pay for something else, then okay, that's not happening. If the pot of money does not cover anything close to US fees, Canada, Europe, whatever, you know, within that there's complications about passport, residency and stuff. And I'll just put in here another hobby horse of mine. There is no reason why the UK student loan shouldn't be usable outside the UK, but it's not. It should be, but it's not. But that money stays within the UK. So first conversation, what is the money you've got to spend? Second thing, is the career path of students focusing something where actually leaving the country would be pretty daft? So medicine, law, education, something which comes to a qualification which isn't necessarily going to be transferable. And if you qualify as a doctor in the US, you're not going to be probably able to stay in the US to work. But even things like you want to work in in real estate, in agriculture, and these kind of things, where there is like a defined pathway. So is there something there that might mean this is possible or not? And then the third thing will be, what as a family is your level of comfort with the distance? And I know that may seem like a silly thing, we're talking about studying abroad and we're in the pandemic, but going to Dublin with, I don't know, before this 80, 90 flights a day, I mean, you can drive and get on the ferry, compared to the west coast of California, compared to Perth. Those kind of personal factors of, yes, Johnny, you might be really excited about studying as far away from mum and dad as possible, but mum and dad just don't want you that far away. An hour or 2 is fine, but it gets complicated, time difference, all that kind of stuff. So what is the money? What is the career path? And actually, as a family, what are the kind of pastoral concerns that come in there as well? And that at least frames the conversation.
David, thank you very much. And we are now out of time. And thank everybody for joining us tonight. And if you have got any questions, you've got David's email address and contact details he provided at the end, and the video will be available. And if you want any questions passing on, you've got our email address at Rocket Learn, and we'll certainly pass those on to David as well. But once again, David, thank you very much indeed, and good night to everybody. And I hope you will join us on other webinars later on in the term. And thank you very much, and have a good evening. Bye bye now.
Everyone, stay well.
Bye.